wish it was published, but you'll have to wait. But big thanks to Adam for a beautiful, well crafted presentation. This one is a little bit different. It's exploratory, and it reflects work I've been doing over the last 5 years or more, 10 years, on sustainable cities and sustainable city regions. We have 5 or 6 parts to this. These are the main clients, as you can see, and the main objectives of the research can be summed up in one word. And this is not quite as simplistic as it sounds, because it's very easy to lose sight of the clients for this kind of work. And you say, well, we have a big contract with Siemens or IBM or something. It's all big, big stuff, and so on. And then you remember, who's this actually for? And these are kids living in a beat-up neighbourhood in Western Salford and near Manchester. Without further ado, the outline of this thing is really a critique of smart city thinking, coming from my own experience of smart city work in Europe in the last couple of years. And this feeling that, yes, it's often very technological, it's very deterministic. So what can be done? And so then we start to step back and say, well, what's going on with this digital transition? It's very easy to get really excited and it's all wow and so on. But can we even look ahead? I spend some of my time doing foresight, capacity building around the world. And looking ahead is really important if you're putting in infrastructure, but it becomes more and more difficult if you're talking about the digital transition. So what can we say there? We also spend time looking at the economic side. And cities, if anything, are spaces of relationships, and those relationships kind of start with economic relationships, but these are not necessarily as we have taken for granted up to now. We have to think about a wider kind of economy, which includes people and all of their livelihoods, and kids and old people and disabled people, and so on and so on. So we have this also to take on board, and this brings in the social side, the social co-evolution, as we call it, which is to say that communities are changing. They're not the same as they were. They might change even more in the near future when Generation Y comes of age, so-called. And so where does this leave us? Well, one point is there are big implications for urban analysis, urban science, urban geography, and transport planning, from some kind of previous paradigm to some more active and self-organizing paradigm. And what does this mean? Also, that we can tie into other huge issues, such as climate change, the role of transport in mitigating climate change. And seeing that climate change seems very difficult to do on its own, what can we do to link in with it? So that's the rough outline. And first I'll just run past you some of the techniques that have evolved over the last decade. This one is called multiple system value mapping. And we have a picture of a city. And the city starts with an ecological cycle, a flow of resources, energy, water, etc. We have certain technologies that we can use to use this, to mobilize it. And then we have an economic system which then functions to organize that and invest in it and so on. Then we have a social and community system which includes people and all of their different complexities. And we also have some kind of cultural system and some kind of governance system. And the point of all this, and we could add some more circles, but that's plenty for one page. The point is to say, we're dealing with a highly interconnected system. It's not just to say, here's the city, and here's the Department of Transport here, and here's the Department of Housing over there. And they don't often talk to each other. This was my experience when I started urban planning decades ago. So if we're serious about moving cities forward into sustainable, or whatever the word is going to be, well, we've got to find ways to make these interconnections. Not as easy as saying it, but it helps to map it. So this is a kind of starter map of the interconnections, and I'll come back to that. So then we say, well, yes, the problems of cities are very complex and interconnected, but most policy is simple and not very well connected. It's in its silos, as we all know, but with honourable exceptions who may be in the room right now. Enterprise and business, well, its main job is to, you know, do its thing and make a profit and so on. So there's a big learning agenda. There's a big gap, a skills gap. And if we had to picture this, we say, yeah, maybe we're actually talking about a city which is more like a brain, in which the citizens or the enterprises or even the locations and nodes are like cells in some kind of brain. And wouldn't it be great if we could get these cells to all kinds start thinking and learning together? So that's the kind of paradigm that we're working with. And if we had to sum it up in 2 words, we could say, yeah, it's like urban intelligence. And that sounds okay. Of course, we can look around all over the place and see huge examples of cities which are not intelligent. We have massive traffic jams. Other places are deserts of deprivation with no transport whatsoever. Climate change emissions continue, and so on. We're really not very clever at this. So how do we look for these connections? Well, there's a way of working. And at the moment, this is summed up as synergistic thinking. It's the art of putting together the synergies. And if we say, okay, this is actually quite a lot to do with complexity. There may be complexity scientists in the room, actually. If so, you could meet up. But from my experience with complexity thinking, there are different kinds of complexity. One of them we could even call simple complexity. Meaning you reduce things like, you know, you call your human beings, you know, like black squares on a computer screen, and then say, well, if this one is next to that one, then it will do something, and if not, it will do something else. And this is a kind of, you know, very mechanical kind of complexity. It does lead to more interesting forms, which might be summed up as adaptive. And some of you might be familiar with complex adaptive systems. There's a whole field of journals and conferences and so on complex adaptive systems. And the image is really of a biological image. To say, yeah, if we are, you know, birds and fishes out there, you know, in the forest and so on, then we can learn from each other, we can organize ourselves on a socio-biological way, and this will then produce things like ecological habitats and wonderful landscapes and so on. But there's something missing, and this thing missing is some kind of human factor. So if we had to sum that up, we could say, yeah, this is something like human complexity, complex or post-complexity. The word post goes everywhere. And the image is that of humans. So if we say, yeah, actually the city is not just a huge machine, and it's not just a sort of biological jungle where usually the winners, you know, eat the losers and so on. It's actually a human system. We have consciousness, we have reflexive thinking, we have learning. We also have other human qualities such as boredom and paranoia and many others, which we could talk about another time. So this is a kind of basic framework for looking at different kinds of complexity. This seems to be helpful in understanding both problems of cities and maybe, if we're really learning fast, then something about the solutions. So if we then take 3 levels of complexity and draw out a very simplistic map of a city, and this map is not a geographical map, it's an actor map. And it's only got 12 nodes, very simple. And you know, you have government, you have services, you have communities, households, labour, industry, primary resources, finance, and so on and so on. I won't talk in detail about what's going on here, but this is a map of regional cumulative causation, as known in regional science. And then we say, well, what happens if we look at an adaptive kind of city? Well, it turns out new links are made between these actors. Of course, all the actors have many links anyway, but we're just bringing the most important to the surface. So new links are made, and these are very helpful because they help the city adapt. And, well, I work in Manchester, and Manchester was previously this kind of smokestack city, pouring out pollution, and so on. This model didn't work once the markets moved, the jobs weren't there. So then we have now an adaptive city, which does pretty well at generating wealth, but the wealth is very, very unequal. And the climate emissions continue, and local problems continue to multiply, and so on. So then we're talking about something which we could call a synergistic city, one where we have more connections made between more kinds of actors for beneficial effects for most people concerned. Just keep all the people happy all the time is really utopian. So we're talking about reality here. And the point is, this is not just some sort of idle dream, but if we look carefully, we can see signs of this all over the place. Social enterprise and social innovation, cultural enterprise, financial systems which are becoming not simply sort of smash and grab finance, technology systems which are now being put, as Adam has beautifully demonstrated. So then we say, okay, well, how does this play out in different parts of the in the sectors? So we can say, yeah, we can envisage some kind of urban synergistic thing. 3.0 is another shorthand. We can think of a transport system which is self-organizing as far as possible. It's responsive, it's inclusive, and it almost grows with the people. I mean, the image of the bicycle is perfect. It's a shame bicycles only have a sort of short range and aren't much fun in the rain. But apart from that, it's the most intelligent form of transport that we know, and so on. So, well, if we had to summarize this method, and then I'll run it through a transport example, we can say, yeah, we're looking at different values and different actors sitting around the table. If there isn't a single table where they all gather, well, we have to, improvise. And we're looking at different, a co-evolution, different kinds of complexity and self-organization. And that's the kind of cartoon image of a 1, 2, 3 co-evolutionary system. So, well, time is always too short, so I'm going to sort of dip and skip, if you don't mind. I'll say a couple of words about the digital transition. This actually came from a future internet project, which was run for the European Commission and various other places. But what we were basically trying to do is understand something of the basic sort of structural systems at work, beyond, say, well, my phone has this amazing new app. We're saying, well, yeah, what's really going on? Are we talking about a linear kind of information system where providers provide it and consumers consume it, and it's a very one-way, simplistic relationship? Or are we talking about some more self-organizing, self-learning system of social knowledge production and information users who are proactive, entrepreneurial, and so on? And of course, this is exactly what digital gurus such as the Wikinomics people and the Fat-Tail people and so on are saying. So we're trying to sort of run with that and understand it in a more kind of structural way. And this is then something which we can start to look at different trends in motion and say, yeah, let's look at the actors involved in this kind of thing. And we then have, again, a sort of a smaller list of actor types like governments and businesses and households and so on. And we can then say, yeah, some of these things seem to be converging. There are the spaces in between. The technologies enable things on the interconnections of these things between business, government and citizens, or between NGOs, financial groups and traders, and so on and so on. So the interconnections, again, become really key to understanding some of the structural trends that are in motion now. And then we can do the same with the sectors and say, yeah, this is about decisions, or it's about market exchange, or it's about co-producing cultural information. Or in a transport case, it might be as simple as, finding the right bus in a crowded city centre, which is really, where it starts and ends. And then we can also talk about, off the bottom of the page, different kind of technology platforms and so on and so on. Then what we can say, I'm speeding up rather, but we can use this kind of mapping to say, okay, so what is Wikipedia actually doing here? It seems to be doing something really powerful, so can we kind of, analyze this in a structural systems way? And what is eBay doing? And what is Facebook doing? And what is all these other things, which are all popping up, faster than we can keep up with. And I get very confused, I have to say. I'm an oldie, but it's very interesting because it is actively changing the structure of how things work. And that is really important, and much more important than simply saying, yeah, here's this amazing new app, and so on. There are problems and responses, which I'll skip, but to tell you, how does this work in smart cities? the context of smart cities, which I guess, although it's not named on the programme, it's kind of the theme of today, more or less, maybe. Anyway, well, I was working with the Smart Cities and Communities stakeholder platform, so-called, of the European Commission over the last year or two. And this is one example which we looked at in a workshop setting and applied some of the methods which I've mentioned. And this is also, seamless. Right, it aims to be seamless, at least on the surface, and it optimizes transport modes, and it's a whole set of apps which trickle through to users at different sort of entry levels, and it involves linking car sharing, bike sharing, ride sharing, and so on and so on. So what could be more great than that? And then we say, okay, well, who's providing it? And what's involved. And here again, we start to do the mapping. Now, I won't talk in detail about what's on the map, but it's a map of relationships between different technical instruments. And then we say, well, this all seems rather linear, actually, because so you can book your train, and then you can book your bike share thing, at the same time as your train ticket. Well, great, thanks. But what about the people who can't afford train tickets? And what about people who don't have smartphones? And so on and so on. So then we say, well, what could be done, simply in this technical sense, to increase the responsiveness, the learning capacity, and the inclusiveness of this kind of technology-driven approach? So there's a whole list of actions which I won't read out, but you get the general idea. And in particular, there are new collaborative links made between one set of actors and another set of actors. Now, how that happens, well, this is then to be worked out. Many meetings will be had and emails will be sent and so on, and business contracts will be drawn up sooner or later, and technologies will be mobilized and so on. But the most important step in all that process is firstly the will to collaborate, and secondly the realization, the learning or social learning of the benefits of collaboration between these different things. We can do the same kind of exercise with the business model of providers. And again, I think our DOT friend mentioned business models, actually. I perked up at that moment. And we say, okay, well, what is the business model of this provider? And, well, we can use an adaptation of the business model canvas, which some of you may work with. If this is a business school, right? So, yeah. We know about business. Okay, so we have, again, there's a value proposition, and the suppliers, and the customers, and there's a cost structure, and so on and so on. All of which is perfectly plausible, but doesn't seem to be very well suited to these more kind of amorphous networked car share, bike access, time share, seat rental thing, which is not necessarily a straightforward commercial proposition. So then again, we have to say, yeah, let's look at some of the possibilities between linking the investment in the enterprise and the customers. What value do they get? And linking the market segmentation as organized by Facebook type things with the supply chain and so on and so on. So then you start to end up with a rather different kind of business model. Obviously I'm not going to get through all of this, but I just wanted to give you a flavour. If we then go back to our social side, and what is the user side, and say, okay, let's think about what they are there for. What do they want? Transport for them is apparently about getting from A to B, but why do they want to get from A to B? What is happening at A or B that makes it, that thing? And as we know now, there is much more to it. So the car, for instance, in the map of our cultural systems, then becomes an ownership icon, an object of love and devotion and so on. And not only that, the car then becomes a physical space, often bigger than people's living rooms these days, and so on, with all of the latest gear. So that's one example. We can also say, yeah, on the cultural side, people like to improvise. But if we're talking about our perfectly optimized transport system, where you have to book online and it's half price if you specify which train you are going on, then suddenly you can't improvise, and it's a real problem, and so on and so on. So the bigger point is to say, yeah, there are these overlapping and interconnecting value sets and logical constraints, logical ways of thinking in the minds and hearts and emotions of consumers of transport. And this is really important, because then we can say, okay, well, we can then look at different kinds of value chains. Now, sorry, I'm going to have to just leave the fine detail. I did have an example on the Greater Manchester congestion charge. Some of you might have had some experience with, but I'll trust that the general idea as demonstrated so far will fill in the gaps. And, well, then we say, okay, what can be done? Well, then we say, yeah, there are different kind of pathways, so-called, which can be orientated around different kinds of collective interest. So here, in this example, we have built environment pathways, we have transport management pathways, we have user experience pathways, we have community development pathways. We could also have a straight commercial investment pathway, and so on. And each of these then relates to a certain configuration of stakeholders involved using a certain combination of different forms of intelligence. So that's where it's all heading to. As to what is to be done, well, then, sorry. Next one. We can look in this occasion roughly at two things: communities with sustainable transport, and also transport for sustainable communities. And again, the bottom line is really to say, yeah, it's all about the people. So, well, this is work in progress. You're very welcome to join the website for the forthcoming book, and so on and so on. So thank you very much indeed. Yeah.